Hi, everybody. Nice to see so many familiar faces from across the campus and across the years that I've been out and about helping people like you try new things, invigorate the students' learning experience, and generally improve teaching and learning here. My name is Michael Sweet. I'm the Director of Faculty and Graduate Student Engagement in the Center for Teaching and Learning. And this is a partnership presentation between the CTL and the College of Communication. So I want to thank Mary Crawford from the College of Communication, Brenda Berkelaar in the Department of Communication Studies, who was actually kind of, these two partners in crime were kind of the spawning of this event, and they just asked, hey, do you want to let folks know about this? And because Brenda's been doing some great stuff with Learning Catalytics. And I said, well, we've got Josh and Ann, Josh Walker and Ann Braseby in the Center for Teaching and Learning, who taught a slightly different a different population of students in a different course using Learning Catalytics. And it was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. So today we're going to have a kind of a segmented presentation, an exposure to Learning Catalytics and how it works, some discussion of how it actually has worked and behaved in real classroom settings. And then you're going to get to play with it yourself and design some activities that you might actually use in a Learning Catalytics format. So I'm going to talk very briefly about the evolution of the pedagogy underlying Learning Catalytics. I've been doing this since 1995, and Eric Mazur is a physics professor at Harvard who started experimenting with having his students talk to one another before. Having his students answer a question, then talk to one another, then answer the question again in the hopes that they could somehow explain it to one another in ways that wouldn't occur to him. And lo and behold, he found that they were able to. And this actually, he tells the story as if this was like a moment of panic for him because he explained something in his physics class and he asked him a question and most of them got it wrong. And then he tried explaining it a different way and he asked them a question about the same content and they still got most of them still got it wrong. And so he's sitting there kind of in the spotlight, sweaty, trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B when all of his efforts were failing. And he finally just said, well, see if you can explain it to each other. And it worked. And so this is one pedagogy that uses student-to-student interaction to help students teach each other in ways that we never could. And there's some educational theoretical principles underlying this. There's this thing called the zone of proximal development, which is the very fertile area for learning, right beyond that which we already know. And sometimes someone who has just learned something is often the very best teacher of it because they still have fresh in their memory what it feels like to understand it wrong, to have a misconception. And they can turn to their peers and they can say, oh yeah, you're thinking of it like this. I was thinking of it like that too. You can't think of it like this. You got to think of it like that. That stuff is right at the tip of their tongue and on the top of their head, whereas for you and I, maybe we never even misunderstood it that way, and if we did, it might be 15 years ago. So there's this real powerful learning potential that exists between students. And so Eric saw this, and so he started doing, here's a question, answer it in your head. Okay, now turn to your neighbor, try and convince me of your answer. Okay, now let's take a poll. How many of you thought it was choice 1? How many of you thought it was choice 2? How many of you thought it was choice 3? Okay, well 3 is the right answer. Let's talk about why. That was like the most kind of Stone Age technology that he used to employ this pedagogy. Well, then along came, then he graduated to having pairs of students, or he had students holding up colored cards, red for A, green for B, yellow for C. And that had some advantages because they could all go up simultaneously, and then he could kind of figure out where the puddles of misconception were and create discussion among those groups. Then clickers came along, and that enabled him to show histograms of understandings before and after. And then a few years ago, he and his colleagues started developing Learning Catalytics, which is what we're playing with today, which is clickers on steroids, really. It's a wonderful platform that enables you to do much, much more than just multiple choice input. Of note, just 2 or 3 days ago, Learning Catalytics was bought by Pearson Education, the Microsoft of educational software. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. That said, to note that these technologies that are underpinned by some really great pedagogies are exciting to us because they're like Ferraris that allow us to accomplish things, even in large classes, that we never thought we could. However, not all, like, the freeways haven't all been built yet to accommodate these kinds of Ferraris. And by that I mean, if you teach a class of 100 students or more, there are only a handful but a growing number of rooms on campus that can accommodate the bandwidth necessary to have all your students on Learning Catalytics all at once. And so that's just a heads up. The infrastructure crews around campus are working really hard to bring more and more online as soon as they can. But what I wanted to do is just by way of inoculating against any potential disappointments, there's a list here on the end of the board. These are the 100 student or more rooms that have high capacity wireless on campus right now. I can read them off. Burdine 106, UTC 2.102A, UTC 2.112A, Welch 2.224, Jester A 121A, Art 1.102, Hog 1.12, and FAC 21. I'll leave those up there so you can like write those down necessary if you want to. There are more coming online in the fall. I'm not sure specifically which one those are, but just kind of as a heads up, there's that. All right, so I am going to surrender the spotlight to Josh Walker from the CTL, who is going to go first and show you a little bit about what Learning Catalytics can do.
Yeah, so Ann and I are going to talk briefly about how we used this in a class last semester. In general, there's actually a particular way we used it that we probably won't get to today. If we have time at the end, we could. If you have questions about it, we could always talk to you more. We used a particular feature in Learning Catalytics referred to as the team-based testing mode. It's pretty spectacular, but it's all it is it's another layer of organizing students on top of what we're going to go over today. So if we have time at the end, we can say more about that. What we really wanted to focus on is kind of the basics of Learning Catalytics. And as Michael alluded to, there's still a lot about the tool we're figuring out and we're clicking through, and it's exciting. But I think what we're most excited about is, well, I'll say it's how we want you to listen and play along today. As a participant, you'll get a chance to be thinking through the eyes of a student and what the student experience is with this tool. You're also thinking like, okay, if I'm teaching a class or maybe supporting those who are teaching a class, how am I processing this tool? But kind of over and above the tool, I mean, this is a workshop we're using Learning Catalytics, but what gets us so excited, and this is where I would encourage you to open your mind to, it's really the pedagogy behind the tool. Because this tool may come and go, we're not like trying to sell the tool. It's pretty exciting, but ultimately we enjoyed the questions that it made us ask about teaching. Like, what can we accomplish in the classroom? How does it get students interacting? How does it get them thinking? So that's the level I would also invite you to be thinking today. Maybe you don't use this tool, but I would bet there are some principles that get uncovered today or that get brought up that you could think, oh, but maybe with a lower tech solution, I could accomplish something similar pedagogically in my class. So so if it's not about the tool for you today, that's cool. It's not really for us either, but let your mind go and imagine all the cool things you can do with it. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ann, and yeah, we're going to give you the chef's tour here.
My name's Ann Braseby, and I was teaching with Josh last semester in a critical thinking class. And Josh was the one that initiated the idea of Learning Catalytics, and we worked together to try and use some of the tools there. We didn't use all of them. It was relatively new to us, and we went in there with a little intrepidation. But we had a very forgiving class, right? And yes, and it was good because all of our students had either smartphones or notebooks, and they enjoyed working with the new technology that we were working with. Go straight ahead. Okay, so hopefully everybody's logged into the class session there. We have the number up there and here.
Is anyone having trouble getting logged in from at least one? I know some of you are trying multiple devices, but at least one is working. Cool. So we're all connected. Great.
Excellent. So our first question, some of you may have used clickers, and so what we want to do is just not give you a multiple choice test to start with, but just let's have a poll and let's find out what our audience knows. So the first question is, which of the following statements best describes your experience with clickers? So have a look at that and You can press A, B, C, or D, and so we can see the experience of our audience here.
Okay. Oh, I had played with it earlier. That's why it's showing around to here.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
There we go.
That's not the one you played with.
No, that's
okay.
Yeah, that's us, right?
So we've got everybody who's had a little bit of experience with clickers, which is great. And when we're using clickers, it really is multiple choice, A, B, C, or D. You can use it as we normally use them, where you have one right answer normally and 3 incorrect answers. Or we can use them as polls like this. Again, we're going to have another poll question just to find out a little bit more about your use of Learning Catalytics, to see if anyone here has any experience of that.
You mean before we start?
That's right.
Yes, in the classroom. So we've got quite a few people that know about clickers, and not so many that have actually used it as Learning Catalytics. We only used it as a participant audience. So hopefully everything we're saying today will be useful to you. We're going to now show you some of the things that Learning Catalytics can do, probably over and above what a clicker can do. And our first one here is we want you to, all these answers here are all correct answers. It says rank the following benefits of clickers. And you could argue that any one of those is a benefit of clickers. What we want you to do is to say, okay, which is the best benefit of clicker? Which one's the least? So we want you to rank order them. And on your Learning Catalytics, you can actually rank order, which is something you wouldn't be able to do with clickers. So let's see how that works. If you think about it on your own and just put which one from most to least. Okay, hopefully everybody has written down their most of the least. What I want you to do now is just turn to a person that you're sitting next to or in front of or somewhere and talk about what your answer that you put and try and justify why you put that answer. Okay. Okay, can you stop discussing now, please? And what I want you to do is I want you to go back and I want you to answer the question again. If you still think it's exactly the same as you did the first time, then press exactly as you did last time. If talking to someone else has changed your perception of that, then put the one that you think now, so we can have a look at and see what the differences are between what you thought before you talked and what you think about after you've talked. So can you press now? You've got about 30 seconds to get it in there. Okay, so what we can do is we can look and see what everybody voted in the beginning, in round 1, and what everybody voted in round 2. We got roughly the same?
Helps. Well, it looks like helps to encourage students dropped in the second round.
So if you can see, they're actually listed in the order of the most to the least. So on the round 1, the top one was...
It's good for low stakes assessment.
And
and
round 2, it was helps break up the lecture. So by talking to other people, you could do this in 2s, 3s, or groups or teams. You can start getting a feel for more of the group opinions rather than just individuals on their own. And you can use this to see where some misconceptions are, or to look and see if by using peer instruction that your concepts are becoming clearer to your students. If the misconceptions are coming more clear on here, then you could give a little mini lecture towards that and start looking to see how you can get them through those blips and bumps that they sometimes have. But by making people rank order them, it's a higher order thinking skill than it is just A, B, C, or D, where you've got 1 right answer and 3 wrong answers. So whenever you give someone 4 right answers, It's a completely different thinking situation than if you just give them 1 right and 3 wrong. Not much to talk about if everybody thinks they know the right answer on that one. Okay, the next one we're going to be looking at. What would we call this?
Fill in the blank here. It's kind of a short answer.
It's a short answer. Okay. Again, something you couldn't do with clickers, and it's in 1 word, and you can use hyphens, and you can play with this just a little bit. What do you consider the biggest challenge of using clickers? So on this one, I'm not even giving you a choice. I'm just making you think up your own answers. And again, think about this in your own discipline. We're just trying to mold this towards Learning Catalytics to help you think about Learning Catalytics a little more. Okay, we've got everybody from this. This is your word cloud here, where we've got obviously cost and they're limited are the 2 main ones. Brenda's got a great example of this, of how she used it in her class, and showed them different perspectives that they could be using. We're just going through some of the tools that you can be using in this, and we want you to be thinking about how you can be using this in your class with your particular discipline. The next one is a little more higher order learning than that one. That is just finding people's opinions. This one we're going to be showing you a passage, and it could be if you're trying to teach topic sentences, or if you're trying to teach certain definitions or anything like this. We're doing it for the moment, again, with an emphasis on Learning Catalytics. I'm going to show you a passage that is from a CIS written comments, CIS written comments, and we're going to ask you to look at that. And if one of your students had written this comment, which part of this comment would be most pertinent for you to start saying, okay, could I use Learning Catalytics to help that student get through that particular issue? All right, so have a read of the comment, and then you actually highlight the phrase or sentence that you think you would most likely use Learning Catalytics to help you through that issue that the student has mentioned. Okay. Well, hopefully the
responses that came in, so we'll show you those.
Yes, yeah.
But this is
hopefully that'll be perfected in the next few months. So, but it's just one of those tools that we can use that can be very, very useful if you just want to talk to your students about what is the most important part of that sentence, or where are you going to get that information from. And you can start looking, mainly if there are some misconceptions out there, mainly if the students are not looking at the right thing. So once it starts working, it will be a much better tool.
We're able to be logged in. So it gives you the effect of it. You can see where basically it's brighter, it's bolder, kind of like a verbal heat map of where the highlightings are stacking up.
Can we change color on that, or do we have to have it in white?
No, I don't think you can change.
You can't change color. It would be nice if it was actually highlighted in yellow. But okay, should we go into the next one? The next one is a really, really cool tool, and it's one where you can ask students to do some kind of predictions in a graphic form. And we've got a following graph. We want you to sketch the relationship between intellectual challenge and engagement. So if you think that as you intellectually challenge your students, they're more engaged, or they're less engaged, or how would you think that would work? So do you just run your finger over as you think? Okay, this is what we got.
Well, there's a few in every class, right? Be different.
As you can see, you can look, and I would say probably a good percentage of people in this room here have got very similar ideas of how that would work. And we could talk about that. We could get people into groups. You can actually allocate people who had different answers and get them to talk about it. There's this 80% rule where normally if 80% of the people think the same thing, you wouldn't normally get people to actually talk about it. But I think you could then go on to start discussing with your students why they think that and get some perceptions about why they think that, and they could even type that at your answers in to show why that happened. Yeah. Next one.
By the way, just curious, was anyone shown the correct answer? Did you see that? Okay.
Oh, do you want to show them what you think of as the
the
correct
setting
answer?
that we set up at the beginning, I think I didn't activate it for this round, unfortunately. But there's a way that it can also superimpose the correct answer on here, if there was one. I don't think I said it at the beginning the right way. But,
And students can go back into the system to look at the answers and the responses. So they can look at what you discussed in class, and then if you put feedback in, they can go back and use it to see what the common issues in discussion were. So some of my students have started doing that.
Excellent. Next one we're going to do is where we're looking at a graphic, and we're asking people to choose areas. Now, this can be used in any of the disciplines. We've chosen to, it's a rather small world map there. And what we want to do is just to look and see where you think the epicenter of the Arab Spring was. You just put a dot there.
Greenland seemed like class.
We could argue Iceland, but not Greenland. And again, you could get people to talk about that and where it started and why it started. I mean, journalism students, this would be a great opportunity to start looking at different people's perceptions of this and why it would be one and having to justify another. But for time's sake, we'll not do that, but just have a think about in your classroom how you could actually use this as a starter for a discussion, or for you to be able to say, I've got somebody who thinks it's Greenland. Let's talk to that person and just see, and where's the rest of them if they put it together. So many uses. We've now got an activity. Josh, do you want to describe that activity?
Yeah, we've never used this format before, but I'm most excited about this very question. So I think I just delivered it over there. Yeah. So given that format that you just saw, where there was a world map, and it's called a region type question, so you were able to touch on something. Now what we want to know from you is, how do you think you can use that kind of a question in your class or your training situation? And so this question is asking you to upload an image. And so we're going to see if this works. So you get a chance now to take a picture, find a picture, and upload. So if you want to go surf the web, we're going to just give you like 2 minutes to do this. Just grab, maybe you've got one in your files that you want to put, or if nothing else, if you have a smartphone, just take a picture of something in the room you think you could make an exercise out of. But think of something you were like, what can I ask of students that I would want them to locate? And you might think outside the box of what a map could be. So take 2 minutes and come up with what you want, and then we're going to get to see everybody's answers. All right, we're going to go ahead and open it up. So I know some of you may have uploaded it, may be still coming through the system, but we're going to go ahead and see what we have here. I wish there was a way to make these bigger. I don't know how, though. I'll just zoom in it's kind of obtuse, but. All right, let's do this. Who sees one that they want to hear about? That, like, okay, what was this person thinking? How would they use this in their class? What do you see on here that you want to hear about?
I want to know about the dominoes.
The dominoes. Where is it? Where are we here? Okay, who uploaded the domino image?
You win.
I have a seating chart. I can out you if I need to. Okay, okay. Can you tell us why the domino picture?
I was thinking, okay, we'll identify where the center of
Okay. Yeah, so, okay, where's the center of the game? Okay, cool. What other image catches your attention here you want to hear about? Put someone on this. Okay. You knew it was Greek. Okay, who did the urn? Okay, can you tell us how could you use something like this in your class?
So I teach archaeology, do a lot with visual literacy. So this is the kind of thing where I might ask students to identify iconography, specific iconographic elements, primary or secondary decorative motifs,
Oh, wow, yeah.
key elements that might tell us something about the dating of the pot.
So which aspect of this is the best piece of evidence or the most telling of its error or something that students would have to like?
This is a terrible one, exactly.
But we're getting the idea.
It's
Gets it.
it's indistinct. But well, you could ask about the primary figures, for example. Which do you think is the most important figure on this phase?
Yeah.
Of the open-ended, I suspect.
It is, and maybe subjective, but that would be a great discussion starter. But maybe it's something more objective, kind of like the one we did with the Arab Spring. Okay, one more. What's another one? Whoever speaks first gets to pick what we want to look at.
Venn diagram.
Okay. Okay. We can't see it in this view from the class, but someone tell us what's going on here. Who did this? Okay.
So it's a feedback model. So when we talk about technology integration in education, so there's technology, pedagogy, and functionality, which is how it's interact with one another.
Nice.
So if I had students analyzing a case of technology integration, I could ask them to show me on this diagram where they think this case falls.
Oh, beautiful. So like you could say something like Learning Catalytics, what is its strongest suit, or what do you think it, or you could phrase that in a way that.
Or here's a case of learning catalytics being used in the classroom. How do you think this falls into the diagram based upon the issues?
Yeah, and so actually we used a Venn diagram in our class. It was during the election season, as you remember, and we were curious to know students' political viewpoints, and we kept it anonymous, but we just wanted to know where would you locate yourself in terms of the source of your political views right now at the beginning of class. And so we did Democratic, Republican, and you, like your own. We just had them, we could have asked that in a multiple choice way or we could have come up with some permutations, but it was just visually much richer and powerful to show that image of their little fingertip, and you could see where the class located itself. We actually had hoped to come back at the end of class and do that again. We ran out of it. We never did. But something like that you could do. Yeah, for sure. Yes?
How long do these sessions run for? Because the idea I have for this kind of question is at the end of class, keep the session open and say, your homework for tonight, or one of your things to do is why don't you go take a picture of something. So scavenger hunt over.
Yeah,
I have to answer that question. The session will not turn off unless you turn it off.
Okay.
So you have to actively turn it off. And so if you want to leave it open, which I'm actually hoping to do for the next semester when I use it, so I have some insight before class of where to focus attention.
Yes.
And can they leave the session open? Can they answer all the questions or just one?
Depends how you set it up. So you can either set it up so that they move through it or that they can only answer one. So it depends on what you want to accomplish pedagogically. If it's something that you want them to just run through kind of an assessment, or if I tend to use the one at a time when I'm using it in class as a peer instruction form. So depending on how I'm using it. But that's a setting on the back end, which is pretty easy to figure out.
So, what's exciting about this to us is the possibilities really open up. Other examples come to mind. I know Perry Sampson from Michigan uses something similar in another tool where he puts a map of a hurricane, and he has his meteorology students identify where's the strongest storm surge going to be on this. And then he gets to reveal all the misconceptions that he otherwise would have overlooked because students are all over the map in that case. Or so I know that we've seen biology instructors put like a image of a cell. Instead of, it doesn't have to be a geographical map. It can be an image of a cell and then predict where's the most likely place for something to form or bridge. So you can, once you start going visual, you can really begin to think about how you can use this. And on that, we're going to hand it over to Brenda.
All right, my name is Brenda Berkelaar. I'm an assistant professor in the College of Communication. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I used it in my classroom. And being the well-planning tenure-track junior faculty member that I am, 2 days before class started this semester, Mary showed me this. I'm like, that's pretty awesome. I'm going to try it out. So my class was not actually completely designed around this tool, but one of the things I want to talk to you about is why I kind of fell in love with Learning Catalytics. And Learning Catalytics is like, in my case, it was like going on a blind date and somebody would kind of tell you in advance, they have a very nice personality.
It's, as you've seen, not the fanciest looking thing. I'm sure Pearson's going to spend some time on that. They like things to be a little bit shiny. But what I really liked about Learning Catalytics was not the tool itself, but how it both enabled my sort of teaching philosophy to come out stronger, engaged a wider range of students in my class, and gave me kind of some unexpected results in terms of both social capital, data, and some other things. So as we've seen before, Learning Catalytics not particularly pretty. But before that, I had used clickers, and like many junior faculty, some of my philosophical decisions and teaching decisions are based on my experiences, often horrible. As a teaching assistant, I was a teaching assistant for a large lecture that used clickers, and students would regularly forget them, not know how to use them, not have batteries, hate that they had to spend $25 on it. And it didn't accomplish a lot in the class pedagogically. There are people who use it really well, but there were some logistic things that really kind of got in the way of it being engaging for me as a teacher. Now, so I didn't like it. So one of the things I liked about Learning Catalytics was that it used the existing technologies that most of my students were bringing. I actually attended college as low income, so if I had attended college now, I would not have had a smartphone. I would not have had an iPad. I was kind of just barely making ends meet to make it through college. And so I did build in an option where my students anonymously at the beginning of class could let me know if anybody needed access to technology. And then if that was the case, I was able to put in with our tech team a list of all the students in my class, so I didn't have to know who it was, who could check in and out technology. So I provided an anonymous way for students who either had a broken machine or didn't have income. That's kind of a personal thing. We assume ubiquity, but sometimes the students, there are students that don't have it, and they're generally not going to self-disclose like, hey, I don't have enough money to buy a computer. So I do try to set that up. But I do like that it was the tools that most of them were already carrying with them all the time. And this semester, not a single student said that they didn't have a machine. So that's one of the things I liked about it. It got rid of the logistical thing. As you've seen a little bit already, there's a lot of different questions. I haven't used them all yet. I'm actually really looking forward to using the highlighting one for teaching writing. I've started realizing how little my students know about how to write. And so while I can do some of it, you know, the technical way, like circle what you think is the least clear point or the most clear point in this student's essay, this lets me gather data from the entire class of students and see if there's common points. It also lets students see when we're doing their writing what those common misconceptions other people had about their writing. So it's not just me as the teacher evilly imposing my, subjective experience upon them. 25 people actually had no idea what your main point was. So I tried it a little bit, but I haven't played with it as much as I'd like. The big thing I really like about it is that it moves from facts to understanding. And I'll talk a little bit about this with cognitive dissonance. I'm not sure if I love cognitive dissonance so much because I'm from Canada. We have a parliamentary system, and so we embed this idea of the loyal or the royal opposition into our very governmental structure. You play devil's advocate just as part of our culture, and I really like that space. Where I hated it as an elementary school student. The teacher's like, are you sure that's your answer? And you hover there going, I don't know. But I want the students both that don't understand, but the students that think they understand, to enter into that space, to have to really think about why it is that they picked the answer that they did. And then move to application, and then one of the holy grails of teaching, transfer. You took this in another course, and then now can you transfer it into mine, and then ideally into life beyond college. The other thing I really like about it is I get some ongoing assessment data. And this was helpful for me because this was a new course prep that I was teaching, and I'm still relatively new to UT, and so getting to understand the background of our particular students was helpful. So a big thing that this, like any kind of peer collaboration tool, if you don't, in this case, there's some theory behind it. If you don't follow kind of the theory and the research, it's very nice when students talk to each other, but they may just be teaching each other the wrong thing. And so there's actually a structure to it that's been documented and shown to work both by Eric's group at Harvard as well. I call him Eric, though I've never met him. I think, and Julie Schell, But you start with generally a brief presentation. That presentation may be a video in advance, it may be in front of the class, it may be a reading they had. In some way you introduce them to the material. Then you go ahead and give what's called a concept test, which is a question, and this is kind of the challenging point. What is the essential kind of idea, the concept that you really want to make sure that they understand from this? From what I know, the people that in the engineering, science, and math have developed large banks in many cases of these concepts. In social sciences and humanities, it's less the case. But it's not that we don't have concepts, it's just some of our pedagogy has not historically been around it. So you give them a contest, and then you have them take the first poll. And if there's 30 to 70% of the students get it correct, you want to have them engage in peer discussion, but you don't show them the class answers. You don't tell them what the right answer is, you don't tell them what the wrong answer is, and you don't tell them how everybody else voted. Because as soon as you do that, you lose that point of cognitive dissonance. Because the students that are right are like, oh yeah, I was right. And they never have to grapple with the fact that they may not be as certain and have as much knowledge. And the students that were wrong are like, oh, that totally makes sense. I'll remember that. On the exam, they don't. Or in life, when they're building a bridge or engaging in counseling or doing something that's a little bit more high stakes than, an exam. Granted, at this point in the semester, they all consider exams pretty high stakes, but. So then 30 to 70%, you go ahead and do the second poll. And cycle through it, like if less than 30% gets correct, you actually talk to them about it. Once you get to about 70% correct, you actually have the students explain it back to you so that that student embeds it and does it in the language. You get at some of that zone of proximal development. But that really key point is if you're between that 30 and 70%, don't tell them the answer, don't show them the answer, and let them engage with each other. And I do different groups each time. I don't have a cohort base, which is actually how Josh and Ann actually used it in their class. So what about these concept test questions? These are kind of like the main topics or concepts or things that students misunderstand, misapply, or confuse, or essential, and ideally those that are essential to understanding the subject matter. So in communication studies, understanding audience or aspects of audience is important. Getting beyond definitions to interpret, to classify, to infer, to summarize. As you know, it's a pain in the neck sometimes to develop these questions, but you can actually share them in Learning Catalytics, which I like. Again, I talked about this, don't give the answer. So I was thinking I should give you some examples from my class. So this is the question. I'm showing you the back end, what I would see as an instructor. But you'll see the question. If an organization typically engaged in sequential communication using a variety of communication media, which of the following would you logically infer from the readings? This was the first question I used after just kind of a generic, like, make sure your tool works, of the students. And so there's a really common misconception in this class on workplace technologies I have, and that you might see as we talk about multi-communicating and multitasking. And students feel like if you multitask a lot or you like multitasking a lot, that means you're good at it. And also other people will know that you're good at it. And this particular reading talked about how if you align with the organizational norms for multitasking, so if you multitask more, and the example was an organization that multitasks a lot, you'd be evaluated as better. You'd be more productive as a worker. The common misconception there are the two that I kind of pulled out. They're just going to assume that across the place, a polychronic person, somebody who likes to do a lot of things, would actually always be rated as higher. Because of course, our generation is multitasking. And in the article, it says polychronic people got rated higher. But the point was alignment with norms. And then the second misconception that preferences are the same as skill. If I like something, then therefore I am good at it. And so I got the first round of answers, and they didn't get to see them, but I'll show you. Pretty much none of them got it right. And it was actually a little bit lower, and I actually violated the rule because I really wanted to see what would happen. And put them in discussion, and they moved to 100. But what was interesting was the discussion point. So it was our second day of class, about 30 students in the class. And they got into groups that I randomly assigned based on different answers. And they were literally arguing with each other, like, no, you have to look here. And they're pulling up their sheets of paper and they're reading. And like, but if you look at the textbook, it's this. And going back and forth. And they were really animated. And it was really exciting. It was like, second day of class. They're all engaged. They're excited. And they actually figured out the response. And more exciting, they retained that knowledge for at least 3 weeks. Don't know yet for the final exam. But for 3 weeks, when they had it again, they retained that knowledge. But what I also get, what I think is interesting, is I get information blurred out for FERPA, of each student, and I can actually download it and look at what they got right or what they got wrong. You can give points if you want. I don't use it for quizzing per se, but you get some information. So I've used it successfully to encourage inference and transfer and help them think about how this would logically translate to another situation to get at the essential idea. I also do it to refine understanding. Here's another multi-communicating and polychronicity. So I had them do a short answer. And so they'll start again. This was actually the same day. Both can only be done well by a small percentage of the population. They talked about different things, divided them into groups again because they really weren't kind of getting the essential ideas about it. And then they moved, and actually as you could scroll down, you can actually see the difference. And showed them both, and we used that as a point of discussion. So those are two of the starting ways. I also used it to question assumptions, and this is the word cloud question. And so my research area focuses on cyberbetting, how employers go online, find information about you to make decisions who to hire. So I'm kind of always in a little state of panic because I research on privacy. And so my first question from the students the day that we were talking about this was, how do you want people to perceive you? In one word, how would you like people to perceive you? And so they put up friendly and nice. Now, granted, not that I don't want to be friendly or nice, but I find the term nice a little generic. But then I said, okay, imagine that you were going to an interview or meeting an employer. How would you want an employer to view you? And it automatically changed. I want to be seen as capable. What's interesting about in the context of cyber vetting is students are engaging in online spaces with their dominant perception. I want to be friendly and nice and fun in Facebook and other spaces. But employers are looking at those other spaces. And so it was really interesting. It ended up being an entire class of conversation centered around this idea of, well, I want to be seen as this way, but in this context, I want to be seen this way, but now we have these collapsed contexts. How do I negotiate that? What's appropriate? What's ethical? What am I giving up if I try to be capable all the time when I really just want to be nice and friendly? Or also Texas. This is a new thing about being in Texas for me. Somewhere in all my classes, there's something about Texas. It's like, Texans love Texas. It's kind of fun. I also use it to ground discussion in students' immediate experience. Again, you can do this in a regular classroom just by raising hands, but you're going to get the student that was like me that always raised their hand. I have an answer for you. I always have an answer for you, and the teacher starts ignoring you, which is effective if you get tired at the end of the semester, because if you put your hand up, they are going to ignore you, even if you're not prepped. But this way, I get kind of a wider range. Worst email subject line. We were talking about framing emails and using it as a point for writing. But then we can pick up some of the examples or group them together. But it grounds it in a wider range of the students' experiences rather than one. Did the same thing with the best subject line. Somebody really liked email zombies. Somebody was sucking up. 12 new ways to eat hummus. It was interesting. I've also used it as a thermometer. And so how confident that you are that you understand the difference between technological determinism and social constructionism. And this is one in future semesters I would actually incorporate as part of an assessment overall if I asked them questions before class, kind of in the middle. And then at the end of the semester, I just recently used this. How would you rank order these in order of priority? Because we had 3 kind of things we wanted to cover one of the last days of class. And I figured out where to spend my time within 2 minutes where I could address kind of their most immediate need. So that's kind of some of the things I've used it for. That was with like 2 days of prep, and I had all the course together, so I didn't really want to overhaul everything. So I'm excited. So here are the consequences. It started to encourage me to emphasize core concepts more. I mean, we talk about that pedagogically, but it really put that emphasis. What are the really, really essential things that I want them to leave my class, my major, this university knowing? What's going to be essential? I was able to use this ongoing assessment data to adapt to student needs, not necessarily with just kind of waiting for the mid-semester exam or quizzes, but I could get it on the fly and adjust some of my examples and some of my lectures. And I ended up unintentionally discussing a lot more about how learning works. I talked to my students about cognitive dissonance. I talked about tolerating uncertainty for a while. And it ended up being a point of conversation throughout the semester that students actually came and talked to me about the fact that they didn't realize that uncertainty was actually valuable as part of the learning process. They always thought that meant they were stupid. And so it ended up having this unintended consequence to talk about learning how to learn and how that process is sometimes uncomfortable. But that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It may actually mean that you're doing it right, that you're actually engaging with something that stretches you. The student perspective, they seem to appreciate the long-term value of the course more. I actually had a couple points of mid-semester evals where I got feedback on it, and they were spontaneously talking about Learning Catalytics. I didn't ask them about the tool. I asked them what they liked about the course, and this came up and said, oh, I really like it. It helps me understand better. I feel like it helps me figure out how to use them in the long term. And so they were spontaneously talking about these things. Again, the uncertainty about testing. Started recognizing the challenges of deep learning. Another unexpected, social capital development. I had about 30 students in my class, and it's possible for me to learn their names, but most of the time they don't learn each other's names. And I've had students come up and say, I know more people from this class than I ever have. And some of them have gotten internship ideas from each other, found jobs, because we have a pretty large major. And so you won't necessarily see the students again and again. You don't follow through a particular track. And so it provided this kind of unintended consequence. So to me, the value, again, is not the tool Learning Catalytics itself. The tool just enabled some of these things that were already kind of in my pedagogical space and to expand those to a broader range of students. I forgot to add one thing. Introverts. My introverts really liked this tool. As well as my second language learners, second or third or fourth, English not as their first language. They really valued it because it gave them a space to engage more without having to stand in front. It also kind of upended some of the room for the extroverts because they actually had to think through their idea and not push through their idea through force of personality. So what I'm going to next, I don't actually get to teach this course next semester, so I'm not reworking it for this one. But for my grad class, and I'm thinking for my another undergrad, just-in-time teaching, having them take assessments and quizzes kind of in advance so that on the fly I can adjust some of my discussion and lecture materials. This is particularly the case for classes where I'm more prepped. It's like really within my research area, but I plan to have them work on this in advance and help them work with the material on their own so that we can engage more in class. But that's how I'm using it. Questions? Yes?
What was your experience with preparing the questions in advance in terms of how much time it took after prep? So bearing in mind this is a new prep, you probably had a lot of substantive stuff to grapple with.
Yeah, so I didn't spend as much time as I would if I was starting it from scratch. So I spent between 10 to 20 minutes. I think that because I'm doing a new prep for the next time I do it, I think it'll be better because I can frame the course around it more. And so I'm kind of refining it as I go. I actually talked to the professor who had taught this course before, and I said, where do they most misunderstand? And started with those. I was actually reasonable in that as opposed to the 2 days before.
How did the other presenters respond to that? How much time did it take you to prepare this aspect of the course?
It was, from my perspective,
thinking up the questions to ask was the most time-consuming of all, because you're looking more at the concepts, and you're asking questions that aren't just right or wrong. It's relatively easy to find questions where you have one right answer and three wrong answers, and get them to answer those kind of questions. But to really think about the concepts you want them to learn, I hate to say this, but it's hard. It was very revealing to me to realize that you have to look totally inside yourself and your subject to find out what you really want the big ideas to be and what they can discuss. And for us, that was the most time-consuming thing. We'd come up with a question, we'd go, no. That's not really good, deep questions. And so that was, for me, was the most time-consuming. But Josh did most of the technology side.
Yeah, just entering the questions. It adds a layer, because now it's not just writing those questions out and printing the sheets to take the class. You have to enter them in. And like any other process like that, it's going to get faster over time. Once you, okay, I know where to click now to get into the session. So there's a little bit of a learning curve to get familiar with the tools like any other new tool. The advantage there being, once they're in, it lets you copy sessions and questions. So if this was to be something you were to use and recycle, you would be building your own bank. In fact, as you create questions, it asks you if you want to make it public to other teachers. So Learning Catalytics is building a bank of itself to function.
Yeah, you can share with other professors. So some fields there are more questions. I also picked questions that I could use across classes. So I did some stuff on the difference between scholarly and popular, because I was noticing a problem across my courses. So I started developing some courses with our questions with misconceptions about that. So picking things that would translate across some of my classes as well. And then I'm sharing the questions I had with the colleague that's teaching this class next when I'm out of the rotation.
Can you embed this in PowerPoint, or do you have to switch between? If you're doing PowerPoint, do you then have to switch out of PowerPoint?
I didn't use PowerPoint, so I never tried.
I switch back and forth, but if you're on Windows, you can just use Alt-Tab. If you're on a Mac, you can just use the screenshot. It was a pretty easy swap back and forth. I know other people have Learning Catalytics on their tablet, and they don't display the answers to the class because they're pushed out to the student anyway. And so sometimes they use their laptop for one or the tablet for one, and then the computer in the classroom for the other. Say it took me like one class to do this swap back and forth. And then you can also, when I was more planned, I just put a click into the link. A link into just the Learning Catalytics thing right in the screen, and it just jumped over.
Does Learning Catalytics save all this data for you? So
Yes, I can download.
A couple classes, a couple semesters in a row, you can see how it changes over time. Like as the teaching changes.
Yes, you can, and you can download it as a CSV file, so you can actually run analyses on it, which I haven't done yet, but I actually want to do. And my TA also has access to it. This is one of the things I hated about the Quicker system that I used. I could only access it with the professor's account, and so he had to be there and logging in, or he had to violate rules and give me his password, which he didn't do, which is good. But here, my TA has access to all that stuff, so long as she's in the UT system. And so managing some of the data on the back end, if you use it in part for attendance and participation, is easier, because that's kind of a logistical thing that's really helpful for a TA to help with.
A little bit more kind of a technical thing, but is it possible to do a non-linear format for your question? Because I've adopted peer instruction type of things in my class, but when I'm comparing my slides, I probably have twice as many questions as I can go through. Depending on how they're doing on the questions, I'll throw questions out the window, move on.
I do that all the time. So if a question turns out to be bad in a classroom, I'll throw it out. If I realize we're going down a different track and there's a learning opportunity, it's pretty easy to jump ahead. So you'll see a list of say I had 7 questions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I can just click on 5. Or if I have a question that comes up in class, I can actually type it in. So I want you to start thinking about this, and then I type it in and then send it to them. And so there's a lot of on the fly, which I really like. I don't like technology to constrain, because there are those days where you have that moment. And I don't want the technology to constrain that moment. I love those days. So yeah, it doesn't have to be linear. You're not like stuck in whatever the original set that you had. Neither the set nor the order.
I have 2 questions. One of the questions is about sort of on-the-fly feedback.
Yes?
It seems to me, looking at this, that there's an option to send a message to the instructor. I don't know what other tools the students have, or whether you have the option to open a back channel, essentially, to let people sort of type in and say, I'm missing something, I don't understand this, or could you slow down?
So they can say that they don't. They can say that they don't understand and slow down. In my class, it was smaller, and so we seemed to have enough rapport, and you don't get that every semester, but we did, so that they could just generally raise their hands. But what was interesting is they would say a couple times 2 or 3 of them clicked, I don't understand, and then that was right before we went into peer instruction. They went into peer instruction. They're like, oh, I understand now. Clicked, I understand. So there is some back channel information available, but I haven't used it in a lot of detail. So I don't know if you can chat with them.
So the second question is...
I could check, though, afterwards if you want to find out.
I'd be interested. So I've been using device-based classroom responses in this semester in a class of about 45, which is about that scale class is about the largest that I would use it for, 40 to 60 or 70 people. Because I can see that once they've got the devices out, they go off in other directions. And just to sort of offer a personal example, while we've been here, I got a phone call, I got a message, which I was worried about, so I looked at the message, I responded to the message. You were on your email for a little bit. Having this open in front of you, how do you manage the compulsion to check in on your social media? You answered your question in 30 seconds. Now you know that the question is still ticking away. Why not just go on Facebook and just provide a quick post? Do you see this as a problem, and do you do anything to address it?
I take a different approach than some people do. If they've answered the question and then they decide to look on social media, even if they didn't take the time, I kind of approach it as they're an adult. If they've decided they don't want to learn it more and they're not distracting other people, they can go right ahead and do that. I work hard to motivate my students, but also, honestly, if they got the answer and they really spent the time with it and they still have 30 seconds left and they want to use it to send a quick message and they're not distracting people.
What if they're still sending a message while you start talking about the next thing?
Most of my students figure that out quickly with the exam or afterwards, and so that motivation kind of changed. I just approach it with, and I talk to them explicitly about it. I allow you to use your laptop in class. Ultimately, you're an adult. You get to choose to do with your tools what you want. Just so you know, you're not fooling anybody when you're like doing, nobody's staring at their legs that long. I very clearly show them images of how much multitasking decreases learning. I do that even in my classes that don't talk about multitasking as a topic. And I said, ultimately, it's your choice. And so I really kind of approach the sink or swim. If what the person is looking at is distracting to other people, so I do talk about that. So say they're looking at lolcats and laughing. If I have it, first of all, if I don't have a TA, I'm the one that kind of makes a comment on it. Privately, if I can. If not, it will be a public, hey, I know that that's really funny. I'm not that funny, I know right now. So if you could not distract other people, but usually it's TA. So that's a different philosophy. But I actually have found, at least from the TA's observations, that using this, if you do allow laptops to be up, does actually keep them engaged a little bit longer. So it's a long answer because it's a philosophical one and people have different debates.
And I mean, so I use them in this class, and in my 220-person lecture class, I forbid devices.
Yeah.
But for just in terms of scale, with 40 people, I can see when they're doing stuff, and they can see that I can see.
Yeah.
It's a different situation.
In the larger classes that I TA'd and lectured in, I had a half room. Half the side of the room was devices, so if you wanted to use your device, you needed to be over there. It could distract people. And then they could sit on the other half. But I also encourage them to use the internet and the tools and the resources they have when they're answering the questions to actually engage with the material, and I've found that that works really well. So they actually use it, but some of them stay off topic. And so I have hints if I'm not lecturing at that point, I will wander around, I'm like, wow, those are doing really well, aren't they? 1 or 2 of those comments is usually enough. There are a few, but it's a philosophical choice, and there are some logistics. Some of it's the culture of a particular class. Some of it's the size. Some of it's what you're accomplishing pedagogically in the space.
I have a question here. To answer this thing, they can do this anyway, whether you use this Learning Catalytics or not, but they can text and Facebook. I have seen that randomly walk into any class, you will see 5, 10 students in the back row with Facebook, YouTube on. And in fact, I was there in Eric Measure giving this presentation in our big lecture hall and all these stuff going on. And one student answered the question and back onto his football game watching on the YouTube. There's a FIFA going on at the time, real football. So
if
like
they're
you
there,
said,
if you say that they can't use them, so in that 220 person lecture class, I say you cannot use
Yeah.
the device.
So-
if I see people, I'll say, hey, listen, I
so
said.
absolutely.
No.
So like the two approaches, one you can take, you're adults, you decide so long as you don't distract other students in the class, that is where you draw the line. But if that makes the teacher feel uncomfortable, absolutely, you have every right to go and shut that down. And I do that all the time. I use a different system we track in locally developed. The same thing, they use smartphones, they use computers to log in, answer the question. We also have a seat mapping system. And so that we can track who is doing what. The thing I avoid that is I have 120 student class. And you keep the class pace so fast, they have no time to browse around or distract. And I do not post any answer key afterwards. So if they don't pay attention to that and they see the question in the exam, it's your loss. Once you see that a few times, they are on their toes. They can't finish the activity in the class time. And the same thing they did in MIT did a T-Lab, Technology-Enabled Active Learning.
Okay.
It's very similar. They're packed with activities 150% of the class time. You have no time for anything else if you are serious about learning. And others, I say, if they want to distract them, there are nicer places to go and do this surfing. Don't waste others' time.
This is not the place that I would say to surf.
But I have a couple of questions for you.
Can I answer one thing?
Sure.
The one thing that that worked best for me is doing shorter questions initially, so that most of the time they were engaging in peer instruction because there was enough pressure from the other people. I didn't use the longer answers till a little bit later in the semester when I kind of had established the norms. In the same way you establish a norm for no laptops, it usually takes a couple class periods. So that may work if you decide to try it out. And I don't know if Pearson's going to change it, but I was able to, the students could have licenses for free for the first month. That was only the first time when I used Learning Catalytics. My account was free. But the first time that I used it as a professor, I had 50 licenses that I could let my students use for a month. I won't get that again, but that let me try it out at no risk to my students and no risk to me. And I just told them that it was a total experiment. We're trying it out.
Just one quick follow-up, if I may, before I ask your question, just because it has to do with how to best use this. You said, what if after they log your answer, you start talking again and they're still doing it? That may be part of the key, is what you do after the question. Because it's not just about throwing up a question to take a poll, they threw up the data and they're back, or to collect data. These are like discussion prompts. And so what should be happening right after that is you're calling on students so a little bit more on the edge of their seat, on their toes, because they don't just get to vote and then go on and sit back and keep listening. It's more about, okay, I see what people have said, now it's a discussion starter, not a discussion substitute.
Yeah, this is something that I'm concerned with because I keep falling into a gap in practice here. So for smaller humanities classes, a lot of this makes sense. Both the sort of team-based learning and the think, fair, share, and all that stuff, and these systems make sense. And for very giant, quantitatively focused classes, I think they also really make sense. For giant humanities classes, where you are in this gap where you are lecturing about things that are vague and non-concrete, I'm still trying to figure out what the place in the ecosystem is for it. Because you can't, it's not a kind of skills-based learning where they can keep doing projects. There is a certain amount of information about people that has to be conveyed, but also factual content. I teach ancient Greece.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't just say, everybody talk about ancient Greece.
Then it
In
comes
your
down to like,
experience, were they- 'cause-
yeah.
So there are some structural barriers that I'm finding in this particular niche of large humanities classes that are not easily equated to personal experience in the present.
So one of the things that I used with, I don't know if I could do it in the mid thing, but one of the things that may work in just conceptualizing whether it would work for you is I had an ethics-based question to ask them to position themselves ethically around something, so it was more of a bigger idea. But I can decide whether they're grouped with people that have similar answers to them or different answers to them. And so I set up a situation where they were in conflict with each other to get at that bigger idea, and then now discuss it. But yeah, I think that you do have coming up with the concepts and questions that will do that and keep them engaged.
Well, frankly, moving 220 students around a giant lecture hall.
They don't move around. You can actually say only 2 seats over or only 1 seat over, and it's really easy to set up the seat map. And so in my class, I just let them go everywhere because it's a small class, and also we had movable tables, so I got tired of entering the thing every day. But then they met everybody. But in a large lecture hall, because you sign in each time, it says people just behind you, people just in front of you, people just beside. And then if you're too far away, it says just go pick a group that's right near you.
Yeah, it's still, I used groups in the class, and I gave them, I mean, they had assigned seats for the groups, but there's still a pretty significant logistical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a 50-minute class.
Yeah, I think that's true.
There was no way around.
I think that's valid.
So I jumped
The other
in.
question.
Okay.
It's an important question.
Appreciate it. This is a great tool for flipped classroom teaching where you don't have to cover a lot of content in the classroom. If you have 50 slides to go over in 45 minutes, forget about this. You better do your 50 slides. But here, you have to deliver the content elsewhere. You want to actively discuss to a deeper, this works. My question is, how is the bandwidth issue for a large classroom when you're really uploading images and downloading questions rather than on-the-fly clicker, which is infrared, doesn't matter the bandwidth?
Yeah, I'm going to speak. I haven't tried it in a larger classroom, and I get to teach in a new building.
Okay.
So we actually seem to have bandwidth issues. I haven't had bandwidth issues yet. But there are some high-capacity wireless rooms that are not having issues, so there's more capacity in terms of bandwidth there. And so for the larger classes, they're encouraging them to sign up there first. There's a list on the side. I don't know if and there's more coming online in the fall.
This is a fancy multi-million-dollar facility with all these access point everywhere.
I know,
with
isn't it?
And
It's nice.
But not every classroom is like that, and that is one limitation. Another is a seating map. Did you do that dynamically ahead of time?
Yeah, it's really easy.
Okay.
Mary
That's
did it for
awesome.
us.
It took about 5
It's just-
minutes to do this.
It's just drag and drop.
Very good, yeah.
Yeah, it's just drag. You just drag the little
Click,
squares.
And then anytime somebody at UT puts a room map in the
It
system,
becomes fixed.
it's available to everybody.
Yeah, so this room map is now available to everybody.
There's one of those for Fact 21, is there?
I don't know.
I have to get LAITS to basically mosaic together some photographs and then draw on them in order to get that seat map.
Yeah.
But anyone run into privacy issues that you're mapping a student on a particular time at a particular place? It'd be good for alibi and stuff.
It is. I actually have used it for a student who's like, I don't understand why I'm doing, and I used to use attendance stuff for this. I don't understand why I'm doing poorly in the class. I'm like, well, the last 5 classes we had all these questions, and you literally answered 1 in 5 classes. And so what's going on in class? And she's like, well, I'm distracted by these other projects. I'm like, so if you want to do better, you might want to start paying attention. So the data has actually been really helpful for them. And they've been doing more of the reading, even though they don't get, there's kind of a general participation grade, but it's very little. But they don't get any points for getting the right answer, but more of them come prepared, which I wasn't planning to do because I just don't tend to say, like, I'm going to grade you on these readings unless I know I need them for that, to understand that concept to get to the next place. I don't tend to do reading quizzes. I had to grade a lot of them as a TA. It really kind of defined part of my pedagogy.
There's a question there.
What is the cost to a student for one semester?
They just sold it to Pearson, so I don't know if it's going to change. But right now it's $12 a semester and $20 for a year. None of my students balked at it, and there have been no complaints about cost so far. And I care quite a lot about the price. And most of them liked it better. And I actually sold it in terms of like, it's about 3 lattes. And I'm like, okay, yeah.
So they are really saving a lot of money over clickers.
They're not saving money over clickers, but they like the convenience. They said, yeah, it's not, because I asked a few of them, like, oh yeah, it's not cheaper. We totally know that. But I don't have to remember that stupid thing. They hated it, at least the students I had. And so yeah, I don't have a representative sample. It's 30 students in one class, but they liked it. And they were taking my workplace technologies class not because they were technically savvy, but because they were not.
They're very ready to get that phone. Well, they always forget they clickers, but
One of
they
the other things I
rarely
like about this too is that they'll give their clicker to a buddy to try and cheat and have somebody click for them, but they're less likely to give them this.
Yeah.
So,
One of the things I didn't like about this when we were using it.
Oh, but there's still ways to get around it. I logged in with multiple browsers, multiple people. But students will always find a way to cheat. They spend, some of them spend an inordinate amount of energy. You're like, could you focus that? But it's cute.
I hear you.
Just a final thing. One of the things I did not like about this was a lot of our students was using laptops rather than smartphones. And when you have a collaboration class and when you're discussing, I found they would be behind their computers a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And there wasn't that like face-to-face that I really wanted. We use team-based learning, so you do the scratch-offs and you can adapt this to a similar kind of system where you have scratch-offs. But when you're behind a computer screen, there isn't that scratching off and going, yay! You know, it's like, well, one of you, I don't know, it was just that there seemed to be a barrier. We had them in square table.
And yeah, I didn't have that. And I don't know whether it was the cohort or the makeup, but my students were more engaged with their laptops. They were pulling up the materials. I'm also using Canvas, so it was pretty easy for them to get the files and preview them right in Canvas. So they all was like, just go in Canvas, and then they were teaching each other like how to get files. And so you can preview it right there. So they were using it as shared space. And sometimes somebody would pull the laptop in front and they'd all group around it. So I don't know what, but there's a point, like if your students tend to create barriers with them.
It was supposed to be discussing. You know,
Yeah.
You've got a question, they've answered it on their own, and then they discuss it and they come to consensus. I just found when they weren't in front of their computers, they were much more engaged with each other.
No, I totally agree. That's why I don't allow laptops in my business classes.
Right.
I don't do it in my big class because I don't think I can enforce it. Can you enforce it? No laptops in a big class?
I taught in an engineering classroom that was a technology engineering classroom, and they all had desktops in front of them, like a giant.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's tough. I've done that.
The last week was I went to the back of the room and did my lectures, so they're not looking at the screen. And if
Yeah.
we needed to do discussion time, then I just happened to click the monitor off. And with laptops, you can just ask them, like, it's the screen down.
Hold it down. Yeah, and I have.
It was actually looked like a huge challenge, and it was the easiest thing ever to get done.
It's just that if they think that you're present somewhere else, they're like,
Yeah.
you can get, it's getting at that first grade teacher, the eyes in the back of the head. They can see everything.
Yeah, there was some blue chairs and then the desktop monitor, so I just stood back there and we all,
The wireless mouse helps with that. Yeah, I taught in a computer science classroom that had like the giant CRTs before that. The short students. Yeah, so to me, the thing that I like about this, whether you decide to use the tool or not, it really helped me think more about kind of core concepts, where we want to go. We don't have as much, and in my department, we don't have as many set courses. So like, unlike engineering with ABET standards, where you're like, okay, you have like almost no margin for moving around. We don't have that. And so it allowed me to kind of think and solidify a little bit more, and I really liked it. And my students did too. But I've taught it in this particular classroom for this particular class. And so I don't know that it would work again, but they were really engaged with the material and seemed to be understanding those concepts that I addressed better than the ones that I didn't.
What was the, for all of the vendors, what sizes of classes were you guys with?
Mine's about 30 right now.
Your class size? 20.
And I'm trying to figure out how to use it with my online class.
Anything on the mid-range size with Learning Catalytics yet at UT?
Pardon?
Has anyone done anything with mid-size, like 100 to
Mhm.
200?
We observed a class of It was about 70 or 80, I think, in a larger classroom. It was a business class.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one in engineering, I think, that was on that
And,
scale.
and I've talked with people who have used it and liked it. So some of it really depends on kind of pedagogical philosophy. Some of it depends on the content, where you want to go, and then just thinking about the material differently. So as I used it, I was like, oh, I could use this question in this way. That would have been really nice, like 5 weeks ago.
Yeah, your classes were about 70 or 80 where it was really developed.
Yeah, I was just wondering about at UT.
Well, we're right at 2 o'clock, so I'm going to officially thank you for
Thank you.
coming.